This is a download from the BBC. For more information and our terms of use, go to www.bbc.co.uk/in touch. Good evening. Gratitude is not quite as straightforward an emotion to handle as some people might think, particularly when your situation means you're expected to display rather a lot of it. As visually impaired people, we inevitably receive a good deal of help and assistance. We'll be exploring the distinction between those two a little later on. Most of it is very kindly meant, but by no means all of it is appropriate, and because of this, or perhaps just because we're in a grumpy mood that day, we don't always show the gratitude expected of us. This can lead to trouble, not least the uttering of that immortal phrase, and that's the last time I help a blind person. And that's really what we want to explore in this programme, devoted to gratitude. Diane Roworth fell foul of this with some of our listeners when she expressed herself as rather less than grateful for being expected to sit in a wheelchair to get from one side of an airport to the other, when all she felt she needed was a helpful arm. She said she found it embarrassing and undignified. A number of you were not impressed.
I'm blind and wouldn't mind using a wheelchair if I was offered it. I wouldn't mind how I got on or off the plane, just as long as I did. Please just stop moaning and get on with it.
I noted there was no gesture of appreciation to the other passengers, whose ticket price included a charge for this assistance, as of course that's how it's paid. I completely support a society in which we all contribute to a better lifestyle for every member of it, including those with special needs, with associated additional funding required. However, it would also be nice if those getting this extra funding showed some appreciation for this, instead of complaining about small shortcomings.
I don't think it's particularly embarrassing to go in a wheelchair, though I do understand that it is for some. However, I feel that being conveyed from A to B in a wheelchair adds an additional disability to the one I already have, blindness. And I do like to do the things I can actually do, namely walk.
I once asked for assistance at Gatwick. When they offered a wheelchair, I reluctantly accepted. I noticed the person pushing me was struggling with walking and got out of breath on a small slope. I spent the journey trying to persuade him that I ought to be doing the pushing. Since then, I've never asked for assistance through an airport, preferring to rely on the general public to advise and show me where I need to go.
And those comments came from Gail Fagan, Donald McGrath, Anne Rigby and Paul Gillett. Well, we wanted first to explore this particular instance, but then move on to the issue of gratitude more generally. Is this simply a matter of good manners, or do we have the right to lay down a few rules and markers? Well, joining me to discuss this is Ian McRae, the commissioning editor of the online magazine Disability Now, Dr David Bolt, Associate Professor of Disability and Education at Liverpool Hope University, and Lyndall Bywater, who is, well, she is Lyndall Bywater, a listener, but she does do a lot of travelling for her work. And I want to start with you, Lyndall. Where do you stand or sit on this specific issue of travelling in a wheelchair? Is it an issue just about practicalities, or is there more to it than that?
I actually had quite a lot of sympathy when I listened to the piece, because I had exactly the same thing happen to me in an airport a number of years ago. And I had exactly the same reaction to feeling affronted and offended. For me, I do find it difficult, and I don't particularly enjoy having to go in a wheelchair. The reasons for that are really simple for me. Firstly, I actually find being transported by wheels, as it were, through a place like an airport quite disorientating. Being blind, the sense of walking on surfaces and getting a sense of my orientation from the space I'm walking through helps me to feel a little bit more in control of my surroundings. And also, I'm with the listener who says, I feel like it adds a disability for me, and blindness is one disability to be dealing with. And I like to therefore make the most of the things I really can do, like walking.
Let me bring in Ian McRae. I mean, what's your attitude to being offered inappropriate help?
Well, back in the 80s, the first time I ever flew, I discovered what I've had to live with ever since, which is that I'm not a particularly happy flyer. And so when they said, oh, we'll put you in a wheelchair, I just kind of sucked it up and said, yeah, OK, go ahead. Now I would say, I'm sorry, I don't regard that as appropriate for my needs. I'm perfectly able to walk alongside you and to see where we're going. And therefore, that's the kind of assistance that I would like, please.
And that's the point, isn't it? I said we'd come to the difference, if you like, between help and assistance later on, you feel there is a rather key difference.
Yeah, I think if you're being given assistance, it's a question of the person who is being assisted has at least the right to say what that assistance should consist of.
I mean, because in a sense, this is professional assistance. There's a contract.
No, I think that, well, there is that contract between the assister and the assistee, but I also think that applies to members of the general public who may think they're trying to help, but actually what they're actually offering is assistance. And that's an offer that's made. It's not a demand for them to be given the absolute right to provide the, as they see it, help or assistance. It's a request that they make or an offer that they make to you, which is essentially, can I assist you? And you either say yes or no.
The point that some people were making was, in any case, why feel indignant about the wheelchair? Dr. David Bolt, why do you think we find accepting inappropriate help so difficult?
Well, I think in part because it is inappropriate, but picking up on that previous point made by Ian is, the difference, if you like, between being taken somewhere, as it were, or being guided somewhere. I mean, that's quite a key difference, I would suggest, as a visually impaired person. But I mean, I suppose at the bottom of all of this is the assumptions around disability that, you are disabled, so you will require help or indeed assistance. But, we, in quotes, will decide what that help entails. And that's, I think, where the real issue lies.
Is there a problem here with the assumption, if you like, that you're disabled and that in some sense disability and wheelchair go together?
I think so. I mean, maybe that this is implicit, maybe this is deep in the mix, as it were. But I think when we talk about disability, and there is that expression, that what I would say horrible expression, the disabled, as opposed to disabled people, and there's that idea that it's one kind of unified group. And of course, if that were the case, then surely the wheelchair would be the obvious choice of a symbol to kind of represent that group. The next step down perhaps would be the guide dog. And imagine if you follow this through and start presenting people with guide dogs because they happen to have some other disability, if I put it like that. It'd be ridiculous.
You only have to look at the language that that's used by non-disabled people. They refer to people as wheelchair bound or confined to their wheelchairs. Yep. And of course, Tanni Grey-Thompson and Dave Weir aren't remotely bound to their wheelchairs. No. They fly in them. They're tools of enabling and liberation. But for us, apart from anything else, the chairs that are actually offered in places like airports are usually so knackered and 1960s that the people pushing them have some real difficulty in keeping them mobile.
Absolutely.
But I think, David, you've also got this worry about, as I say, being lumped together. And you think that people are making an assumption about you that you don't resent, but which is inappropriate, which is wrong.
We're not kind of having issues about being thought of as someone who uses a wheelchair, except for that we don't use wheelchairs. That's the issue here.
Because it's something I wanted to try and tease out from this discussion, because it worried me slightly myself that we were sort of implying that we thought there was something intrinsically undignified about being in a wheelchair, which, of course, for a wheelchair user is ridiculous. It's not undignified for them, but you would say it was undignified for us because of the assumption that's being made about it.
I wouldn't refer to dignity for the simple reason that the wheelchair, for someone who uses it, who needs to use it, and so on, represents freedom and empowerment. Whereas if I'm presented with a wheelchair at this point in my life, it just represents someone making assumptions about the way I travel, the way I'm going to engage with the world, or whatever that might be.
Which, of course, is the point that Lyndall was making. It's not appropriate for her. Lyndall, can I bring you back on this? Because there's another person in this equation, and that's the one offering the help. We've dealt with the situation where the assistance is a service and therefore ought to be governed by certain, what you might call, consumer rules. But the huge majority of the help we're offered just comes from person to person, offered in a spirit of wanting to help. I gather you think sometimes we, as visually impaired people, oversimplify that role and the needs of the helper.
I think sighted guide is the easiest thing in the world. And for me, whenever someone says, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't think I'm doing this very well, or I don't really know how to do this, I'm like, you're doing great, you're doing fine. Because for me, they just need to walk normally and have a bit of a weather eye to their left or right, whichever side I'm on, to make sure that I'm not about to walk into a lamppost. But then if I've got a guide dog, they're often handling the left wing anyway, so I don't need to worry too much. But for me, I think it's very easy, but I accept that a lot of people who are suddenly put into that position feel terrified. I think they're going to kind of break me or something.
Ian, there is a very famous moment in a movie called Scent of a Woman, which stars Al Pacino, who plays a particularly grumpy blind man. And there's a pivotal moment in that where he's at an airport and somebody's assisting him to a cab, and he just stops dead in his tracks because they've got hold of his arm, and he just says, I hold your arm, you do not hold mine. And that kind of labels him as a character straight away, but it also shows that, you know, he may be in a somewhat inappropriate way and manner, but is simply making the demand that the best way to guide me is the way in which I'm comfortable being guided.
But is it therefore our job, when that sort of thing happens, to actually almost give a quick mobility lesson to someone in the street when all they actually want to do is help you into the station or into the shop where you're trying to go?
In those sort of informal, non-contractual, if you like, instances, you know, a bit of pragmatism has to take over. And the questions that I ask are, A, do I need help at this point? B, can I quickly tell them the best way that they can help me? And C, should I just knuckle under and take whatever comes? And the answer to question C is no.
Right. But, of course, that presupposes the question that we're always lovely and cheerful and helpful and being really thoughtful, which sometimes we're not, are we?
No, but on the other hand, we were taught at school, I'm sure you were taught this at your school, Pete, where they said, if somebody offers you help, regardless of whether you need it or not, you should accept it. We were taught to be compliant and just to give in.
I don't ever remember being very compliant, I must admit.
Can I just come in on that? I really relate to that, and I make a very clear distinction in my reactions to people. And if a member of the public offers me help, then I try very hard. I can't ever say I don't, because mood is mood, but I try very hard not to get chippy or grumpy about that, because I accept that any help they're offering, they're doing out of the best will in the world. If it is someone who is paid particularly to help me, and that is their profession, if you like, then I will be much more stringent about the appropriate ways to do that. So if someone who's part of Help and Assist team wants to help me and they take my arm, I will stop and I will say slightly more politely than in Scent of a Woman, actually, I need to take your arm. And that's something you might want to just bear in mind when you're guiding blind people.
Can we explore this perhaps from another perspective? And that is that we, as visually impaired people, we don't have a great deal of choice about the amount of help we need. And we have a choice, as Ian says, about how we deal with it, but we don't have a choice about needing it because it can crop up. And therefore we have to accept things. And however confident and competent you might be, if you want to engage in everyday activities, there are just times when you do need help. And that means a great deal of interaction. Ian, I think you've got a few techniques for, as it were, putting up a kind of do not disturb sign if you are in that kind of mood or you're in a situation, because we do have to interact more than other people, don't we?
I travel on the Underground 5 days a week, twice a day, and I get offered assistance, help, however you want to put it, probably 2 or 3 of those journeys. Mostly the kind of request that I get is, can you manage to get on the train okay? And I just say, yes, that's fine, thank you. I do this journey every day. And I make it plain to them that I know what I'm doing, I know where I'm going. And usually, in fact, almost always they back off. Occasionally, you know, you'll get somebody who will say, oh, let me show you to a seat. And the next thing you know, your arm is somewhere up over your head as they're kind of dragging you onto the train.
I must say, if you only are offered help a couple of times a week, I don't think I've ever had a journey, probably, where I haven't been offered help at some time or another. As a totally blind person using a cane, there is an assumption.
I carry a cane too. The one thing I never turn down on the tube is the offer of a seat, particularly as I have a 45 to 50-minute journey. I like to read. So if somebody says, and particularly if they're sitting in the priority seats, so who's younger than me, who isn't disabled and who isn't pregnant, and they say, would you like a seat? I'll say, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that.
I'd love to know, as a visually handicapped person, how you know all these things, you know, whether they're pregnant and whether
they're... there are assumptions on my part then.
Yeah, well, we all make assumptions. Lyndall, How do you deal with the days when you don't want to do a lot of explaining? You maybe don't want to accept a lot of help, but it's part of life. It's an inevitable thing that you have to do.
It really annoys me when you get to the sort of the train barrier and they say, where are you going? And I say, could you tell me what time the 5:10 to Canterbury leaves? And they go, where are you going? And I say, could you tell me what time the 5:10 to Canterbury leaves? Where are you going? And it's all about, there's only one track of communication, that's we are going to help you. And all I want to know is what platform or what time the train is due to leave. And they're insisting on putting me into the assistance system. Then I get quite grumpy and sometimes even a little bit rude.
And I suppose this is the danger, that we could all end up sounding like four rather frightening visually impaired people who've all got lots of complaints about the situation. And therein lies the problem, isn't it? Because most of the people who are helping us, moving away now from the contractual ones, maybe are doing it for the first time, are doing it out of a sense of obligation. And that's really my point about this, and perhaps was at the heart of some of the emails we got.
This is the idea that is often put forward, isn't it, that social justice, if you like, is all about tolerance. And I don't think that it is about tolerance. I think true social justice is actually about appreciation. And if you're being appreciated for what you bring into society, what you add to society, it's a very different scenario than being tolerated and as in Lyndall's example, being told what you might want to know.
But most people don't think when they help you that they are part of a sociological experiment or that they're seeking information. They think they're getting you out of a hole or stopping you being run over. That is what's in their mind.
But they think that without asking you quite often. Yeah. They just show up and say, right, I'm pitching, I'm going to help you now. And the other point that I'd really like to pick up is this whole business that we should just be grateful. Well, no, because if help that's being offered is inappropriate or unnecessary, not needed by us, then we don't need to be grateful for it because it's not what we want or need. And B, that really harps back to the kind of charity model of disability and the fact that what is provided for us is provided in a charitable way, and therefore we should just be nothing but grateful, in the same way that Oliver Twist is seen as deeply ungrateful because he goes up and says, I'm still hungry, can I have something else to eat?
Well, that reminds me, I used to commute to London from Canterbury 5 days a week, and in the morning when you commute, you're not even awake. You get on the train in order to sleep more. And I think the demand on us to need to be polite, to need to be interacting, to need to be grateful, to need to be thankful, to need to be helping those who are helping us. It's demanding, and it's an extra demand on us that none of my fellow commuters had to face in their situations of not needing assistance and not being disabled.
OK, what about a final top tip? One to would-be helpers, one to visually impaired people themselves. Mine to myself would be not to try to be so smart all the time. Try to choke down the smart reply. Like when people say, and it's interesting, Lyndall rather referred to this, do you know where you're going? And I tend to reply mystically, do any of us? So I think I should perhaps stop doing that.
To helpers, I would definitely say ask if help is needed and then please listen to the answer. To visually impaired people, I'd say go to Spain. I went to Spain once and I was told I'd have to go through the airport on a buggy, and I went on a buggy ride which defied all health and safety concerns. It was a white knuckle ride, I tell you. I don't know how me and my luggage didn't end up all over the floor several times. And as one who loves roller coasters, I cannot recommend it highly enough.
Right, well, that ends the White Knuckle Ride of In Touch for today. But we'd like to hear more such top tips and indeed your views on the whole issue of help and gratitude. You can call our action line for the next 24 hours on 0800 044 044. You can email In Touch at bbc.co.uk, or you can use our website to get more information or download tonight's programme. So Ian McRae, Dr David Bolt, Lyndall Bywater, thank you all very much indeed. And from me, Peter White, producer Cheryl Gabriel and the team, thank you.